So the community average had always been that AGI, if you're familiar with that term, artificial general intelligence, is likely to emerge around 2042. Based upon this Palm AI information, they have now updated it to 10 years away, 2032. Yeah, it's insane.
Welcome to the World of DaaS, a show for data enthusiasts. I'm your host, Auren Hoffman, CEO of SafeGraph and GP of Flex Capital. For more conversations, videos, and transcripts, visit safegraph.com/podcasts. Hello, fellow data nerds. My guest today is Liv Boeree. Liv is the former World Series of Poker and European Poker Tour champion. She's a television commentator, a science nerd, and a philanthropist. Liv, welcome to World of DaaS.
Thanks for having me. Nice to see you.
Thank you. All right. Now, I know you're like an astrophysicist by training and you're a probability expert. We've got something in common. I'm not an expert, but I'm into probability. Now you've spent some time thinking about the likelihood of interplanetary life. I think most people don't spend at least a lot of time thinking about aliens. And we tend to think of it as kind of a binary, like either they exist or they don't exist. Like, how should we think about extraterrestrial life?
Well, I guess first of all, we need to actually define what we mean by aliens. So, because I think it actually means different things to different people. I always assumed it meant people thought of it as, within this physical universe as we understand it, on other planets elsewhere, life has independently evolved into some form of technologically advanced civilization. Yep. Although recently I was talking with someone and they were like, well, actually a lot of the alien sightings that seem to have any credibility, it seems like they are comparable to like angels that people saw in the 1500s and so on. It's like they almost imply that there's some kind of like intelligence outside of our physical universe that is not necessarily, it didn't evolve within our universe per se. It sort of is something from outside it.
Let's assume that we keep the, your definition of kind of intelligent life on other planets. Right. How should we be thinking about that?
So that question, basically, it's interesting because it's our intuition tells us, we're all familiar with the law of large numbers. There are billions and billions of planets out there. So it just goes, it stands to reason that considering that we managed to evolve and exist, that there must be other intelligent civilizations out there. But the thing is that we only have an N of 1. And that doesn't actually really, it doesn't give us any real insight into the actual probability that life can exist. That life will evolve on any given planet. If there was another civilization out there that we detected, now actually we can start like making, you can draw inferences from that. But because because by definition, for us to even ask the question, we have to exist in the first place. It just does this like really screwy stuff with our intuitions that makes us think that therefore life is easy to make, but it doesn't seem to be, because when we stick our telescopes up into space, despite some claims by the military and others that actually we are being visited by aliens all the time, but the consensus from the scientific community is that we have not seen any evidence of, any definitive evidence that extraterrestrial life exists out there. Especially as within a few thousand years, we went from sticks and stones to building rockets. A few thousand years is a blip in the history of the universe. So if it's that quick and easy to actually have this technological explosion that would make us, that would make interstellar travel possible, then the universe should be teeming. Assuming it's even if it's only a fraction of planets create life, then just by the law of large numbers, the universe should be teeming with aliens. But it's not. We're not seeing any evidence of them. We're looking pretty hard. SETI has been doing it now for 30, 40, 50 years. And we're still not finding.
I mean, I used to have one of those screensavers on my machine back in college.
Right. Yeah. And I love that they're doing that work. I think it's important work and it should continue. But as time passes and our telescopes improve and we're still not finding anything, that's mounting evidence that actually it doesn't seem like there is really any life out there, certainly within our galaxy, which is the area where we were looking. Outside, in other galaxies, it's harder to say. And by life, I mean advanced civilizations that are able to,
make fire,
travel, give out radio signals, basically.
Give out radio signals.
Harness the electromagnetic spectrum. Yeah. So what's interesting is that historically, I don't know if you're familiar with the oh wow, my mind's gone blank. Drake equation, that's it. I knew my mind went blank. So the most famous formula, one of the most famous equations that anyone has come up with to try and calculate the probability of alien life is this thing called the Drake equation.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that. What's the Drake equation?
So it's basically just like, okay, how many stars per year are made within our galaxy? How many of those stars have habitable planets? Of those planets, what fraction of them go on to create life? Primordial life, what fraction of that primordial life turns into some kind of intelligent civilization? And then how long does the average intelligent civilization last? Basically, it's just a bunch of these variables multiplied together. And in theory, if you plug in the numbers, then you'll get a probability out the other side. Well, a number of civilizations that should conceively exist within
at any given
time
or something like that.
Exactly, in any snapshot of time. And the thing is that when you even if you do what feels like very conservative estimates, you're like, okay, only 1 in 100,000 planets create life, and only 1 in 100,000 of those go on to create a civilization. It still spits out a number like 10, let's say 10 or 100 or something, a number that would suggest that there should be at least some signs of life out there. But it's basically an interesting sort of foible of statistical analysis, that if you only put in point sources, like individual numbers into each one of these variables, and then crunch the numbers across them, it always gives much higher values than it should. And basically a team of researchers at the Future of Humanity Institute did the proper analysis on this using Monte Carlo simulations across a broad range of variables. A broader range of uncertainty on each one. And if you do that, then the answer actually comes out to somewhere around that it's about a 50-50, that we're the only intelligent civilization within the observable universe, which I think is mind-blowing.
But presumably, if there was another intelligent world out there 1,000 years ago, and they were doing this exact analysis, and they were looking at us, they wouldn't see anything because we weren't emitting any radio. So there could be a very narrow band of time, given how long the universe is around, to find. So it is about these that they have to overlap, right?
Sure. Yes, they do have to overlap. But again, if there are that many possible sources of life, then how many? There's 10 to the 12 stars in our galaxy. I think it's many, many billions. So again, even if it's 1 in 100,000, that's still going to be lots of sources. But yes, you're right. It depends on the average length. Well, we have to assume as well that there's no clear reason why a civilization that once it starts producing radio waves and starts being technologically advanced doesn't continue doing that. Unless, of course, there's some horrifying great filter, which is what obviously a lot of people suggest there must be. There's some kind of filter somewhere along this chain of events, basically, that stops life from being ubiquitous and sustaining. Whether the question is it from prokaryotic to eukaryotic life, or even prior to that, just getting enough complex molecules to create the primordial soup required for DNA-like structures to emerge, or is it something later on that the jump from mammalian intelligence to mammalian intelligence or mammalian-like intelligence plus technology? There's some kind of filter there which kills them all off. Certainly, the way we're going seems like we're developing the technologies of gods without the wisdom of gods, and that's a bad combo. So
okay, we are developing the technology of gods without the wisdom of gods. And I know that one of our other former World of DaaS guests, Will Marshall, the CEO of Planet Labs, said that building a lunar base is one of the more obvious things that we can do to reduce this existential risk. And he thinks we could build something like that for under a few $1 billion. Why is nobody doing this right now?
Great question. If it is truly possible to do for under a few billion, like 3 billion, I think he said, right?
Yeah.
I know it's mind blowing, to be honest, why it isn't. I think it's a combination. Well, it's a very difficult, even if you have the resources, it's a very difficult project to presumably, there's so much competition for engineers. If the world is in a deeply short supply of engineers, and presumably all the best space engineers right now are going to, say SpaceX, who are working on a Mars base, right?
Yeah.
And so you basically need to build a competitor to a company like that. If you want to focus specifically on the moon, you need to do that, and that's very difficult. I'm sure it's not, I mean, technically, if you say,
and
I'm
you don't
going to
think
fund
this is
this project,
something
that
a
would
government
inspire.
could do? Like, you need to have a for-profit company to do this?
I don't know. Once upon a time, I would have said yes. Clearly, the government in the 60s did amazing things with space,
Yeah.
right?
Well, it was much more competent in the 60s.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. What do you think?
I don't have a good answer for that. I think it seems like with certain systems beyond, when it reaches a certain number of employees, then you start getting more and more baggage of bureaucracy and rules, and perhaps beyond a certain threshold of these like legacy rules, it just slows things down so much that these really like moonshot type projects just become so extortionately expensive that they are not feasible. And so you have to outsource it to more streamlined, like entrepreneurial things, using conventional business to do it instead. That's what my guess is, that there's like some kind of like weird threshold number beyond which of like rules and regulations, and just like or like bureaucratic layers beyond which it just becomes impossible to do these like really long or too hard and too expensive to achieve these like highly complex long feedback loop projects, such as like building a moon base. That said, there are efforts going into it right now.
I mean, governments in the 30s were incredible about building the Hoover Dam and the Golden Gate Bridge, and they were able to do these things in a very, 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 very fast pace. Whereas today, it's unclear they could even build like the bathroom for the Golden Gate Bridge in that same time or something.
Well, that was what was different. Like when was it, the 30s that the Hoover Dam was built? Presumably there were a lot less rules back then.
That's true.
In terms of, there were a lot less institutions. There was not a department for making sure this species of newt is preserved. There isn't a department for there was less health and safety and so on. And I mean, like, workers' rights were like objectively worse. Like the workers working on the Hoover Dam had a very bad time. A lot of them died, right?
Yep.
So that's the kind of trade-off. If you want individual workers' rights to be kept to the highest possible level, that means you can't push them to do really long hours. I don't know. It's just it bakes in so much clunkiness and slowness that it makes it so much harder to do this. So you need to kind of find ways to trim that. I mean, and to be fair, like modern businesses, though, people who work for these big technology companies these days, by and large, have a very good package of payments, hours, that sort of thing. So it is possible to have really good workers' rights, but also have a very streamlined process. And that's why, I think capitalism has worked so well. That's why we're seeing most of our great innovations are now coming from companies as opposed to government. And I think we should embrace and celebrate that.
Interesting. Now, a lot of entrepreneurs today are focused on, consumer products or ads or B2B software. How can we as a society incentivize more entrepreneurs and funding to work on and fund more these kind of moonshot projects, potentially cause like step function progress in civilization?
How do we incentivize them more? Well,
or how do we get more people working on these like super hard things rather than, some additional push notification software? Nothing against that, but it's a great, valuable thing. But
Yeah. I mean, I think you need more of the sort of Elon effect type people. I think in some ways, I don't know if there's any way you could truly create new Elons through a sort of systemic change. And by Elons, I mean, like people who are willing to just like have unbelievably audacious grand visions and make a lot of personal sacrifices to get there. Or like,
but even him,
like
his first couple of startups, especially like Zip2 is, I don't know, it's kind of interesting, but it wasn't as nearly as audacious. Like he had to get to 100 million plus of net worth before he had the kind of the ability to be more audacious.
Right. But it seems like he's had that, Mars has been a long time plan for him. Doing something very big and grand has always been a plan. I feel like, from what I understand, Zip2 and that sort of thing were kind of, he saw them as stepping stones, basically, as a way to accumulate enough capital, right? And he wasn't just then going to be satisfied with that. So I think by and large, you just need you just need your society to, like, a certain percentage of, a very small percentage, but a certain percentage of people will be born with these kind of traits, I think. And the question is, how do we make sure that they don't go to waste? So one thing perhaps society could do to actually create, it's not that it needs necessarily better incentives, it just needs better nurturing of these like really unique individuals, super high IQ, but super big dreamers, and people who are willing to like just dedicate, like this like deep mono focus that it requires to achieve such like huge goals. We need to create systems whereby those rare gems don't slip through the net. Like, there's 1 billion people in India, and so many, that means there's going to be so many like geniuses hidden in there somewhere, but who knows, they're like born into some poor village, and we never get to hear about them. So how do we build structures whereby these highly intelligent, highly focused big dreamers get caught by society and are enabled to do stuff, to fulfill their potential?
How do we think of maybe can we think of it the other way? Like all these super smart, super high potential people, many of them astrophysicists and stuff, became hedge fund managers in the last 30 years. And, maybe had certainly increase their wealth, but didn't necessarily like add a ton to society. Those same people, in the 50s and 60s, the same exact person may have been doing something very, very contributory, or something that added a lot more, or building or something. Is there but I don't blame them. I mean, the hedge fund incentive is 10 to 100x the incentive they have for the other path. So how do we kind of like, do we change the incentive of the other path, or do we lower the hedge fund incentive?
Well, I don't know if you can, but I think some people will just value money, right? And that's there are some hyper smart people who think that money is the instrumental tool for them, and they
certainly Elon Musk values money, like
for sure,
one of his most important values, right? So and
yes,
many successful people do.
He sees money, people like him see money as an instrumental goal, not an end goal. Whereas like the hedge fund manager example who you're talking about, right? They see presumably money as the end goal.
I don't think so. I think maybe I'm wrong, but I would say all of them probably value status over money. And they constantly are paying for status. And so obviously you can use money to buy status, but there's other ways you can get, if you're a US senator or something like that, you have status too, right? So
right. Well, it can't buy status is one thing, legacy is another thing, right?
Yeah. And they buy legacy. They do things like that too. So you
incentivize. Do you want to have a city named after you someday, or some kind of incredible scientific breakthrough that you funded? Like, so basically, you need to do something. You need to incentivize them to do something that helps the world, because if you help the world, you're going to get far more like brownie points and bigger legacy and celebration.
They all endow a share of whatever at Harvard at some point or something, just so they
but
can.
even that has become
Yeah.
like lower signaling value,
Right.
right?
That's true. In fact, it might be negative signaling nowadays, right?
Seriously. No, I was actually thinking about this. Like if I was trying to hire someone, because now you can say do a Coursera course from Stanford or whatever. I think I would value someone who completed an engineering course, or a Stanford engineering course on Coursera at age 30 than someone who got into Stanford and actually did it themselves. Because the person who's gone to gone through the rigmarole of completing that course online without necessarily even going to get any credit for it, that actually means they love engineering and they want to do engineering. Whereas someone who's going to Stanford to do engineering, maybe they love engineering, but maybe they want to get that signal prestige of going to Stanford, which is certainly
I'll take it one step further, which is like maybe if they took the Coursera course with the Stanford engineering team, they're probably still trying to signal. If they took it with like just a random university that was known to have a good professor who was really good at teaching or something, then they probably care much more about learning stuff. Because I found there is a somewhat of an anti-correlation. The better the school, usually the professors are worse teachers. Certainly when I was an engineer, all the Nobel laureates couldn't teach at all. Every physics class I took with a Nobel laureate was horrible. And the best class I ever took was like a visiting random class I took from a San Jose State professor. Nothing against San Jose State. It's probably a very fine institution, but it's not as known as a difficult school to get into. But the teachers there really know how to teach. And he was just phenomenal at teaching engineering. Whereas my teachers at UC Berkeley, they were much more good at doing research, and they had a very, very tough time teaching undergrads.
Yeah, I think I noticed roughly the similar thing, actually. The ones that, the famous, there was only a couple of famous professors at my university.
Yeah. I mean, certainly Richard Feynman is a great teacher, but he's almost the exception rather than the rule.
Right. Yes. Yeah, no, he's a rare egg for sure.
You talk a lot about how like aspects of AI worry you. I one of the interesting pieces I read recently was by Gary Marcus. He wrote about the deep learning's hitting a wall, and he basically notes that like GPT-3 is still very error prone. AI misinterprets like radiology scans by a mile. Do you feel like AI is something we should be super concerned about, or why, where do you fall in that kind of controversy?
I think we should be super concerned about it. Yes.
Just because the risks are so high, or because the probability is high?
More that the risks are high, even if it's a very low probability that, we actually create some very powerful or super intelligent system, the consequences in either direction, if it goes really well or if it goes really badly, are so high that we need to take it extremely seriously. And they're right that, for every dollar that's spent on progress, for every dollar that's spent on safety and like making sure things are done well, it's well over $100 are spent on just sheer progress. So there's a deep imbalance there. There's massive incentive pressures to build bigger and better systems, because there's multiple AI companies out there now. If there was just one, like there was 7 years ago, then or 10 years ago, then it wouldn't really be such an issue because they could just take their time. But now there's multiple out there. There's competitive pressures making everyone, it makes it much harder to optimize for safety. But yeah, you mentioned like GPT-3. It's error prone. Well, I don't know. I was just looking into some of the language models more recently. I don't know if you've seen this Palm one that Google AI recently. I think it was them. So GPT-3, I think, had 170 billion parameters that it was like using. And this Palm one has about 3x of that. It's 500 or so billion. And yet the quality of I don't know if you've seen what this thing can do, but it's doing like it doesn't just like answer, like if you ask it, what's, I have six oranges and 7 apples, and then I take away 3 apples, how many do I have left? Not only can it answer what the correct answer is, like numerically, like a sort of 6-year-old would do, it can even describe to you its chain of reasoning. So it'll be like, well, so before that you had this many apples and oranges, and when you take them away, that it answers it like a smart 9-year-old would answer the question if you asked them to say, show your learning. It's absurd. And what's so interesting about that is that they historically thought that as you add more parameters, you're going to get sort of diminishing returns. It's sort of going to, it seemed to sort of scale kind of linearly in terms of performance, but then they assumed that like it's going to start diminishing off. But what this has actually shown is that as you add more parameters, it goes super linear. It's really like the sort of some graph, and literally shows that this thing, the more you add, the better it gets, which suggests that there's like some kind of emergent properties that are happening, presumably like combinatorial explosions or something like that. And it's just creating this like sort of exponential potential for greater complexity and thus intelligence. So this, and what's interesting is like, I don't know if you're familiar with Metaculus. It's like a community prediction site. It's really cool. It's like a community of people who are just really interested in the future and making predictions, formal predictions. Mm-hmm. And so it then...
It's a prediction market
Yeah, it's a prediction market, basically.
Okay.
And so I think it's one of the best tools we have for sort of crowdsourcing, like looking at accurate predictions of when like major events are likely to happen. And so the community average had always been that AGI, if you're familiar with that term, artificial general intelligence, is likely to emerge around 2042. Based upon this Palm AI information, they have now updated it to 10 years away, 2032. Yeah, it's insane. That's like the biggest jump I've seen on there. And I think the Metaculus is probably our best resource of actually making of like what the likely timelines are for this. So it's
what can we do to, if it's that close, what can we do to make it safer?
I mean, it's I don't have a good answer to that, and I'm not an expert on this by any means. I think we can reward companies that actively demonstrate that they are thinking about sort of the dual use of these things. I mean, because even like AGI itself is not that, I mean, that's a concern, but even these like narrow AI misuses, like TikTok terrifies me, honestly, because it's just like it's gaining so much data, particularly from like the neurochemical drama of
so
teenagers.
There's some government regulation that could come in to at least slow it down, you think? Or
I don't necessarily think government regulation is even the best route. I think more part of the problem is that actually like there's this like scientific incentive, all the journals like Nature, Science, etc. Everyone is like chasing after prestige points, right? Like individual researchers, understandably, what they are optimizing for is getting published, getting their names on big papers, making groundbreaking, progress in AI or whatever scientific field it is. And all the while that they are rewarded by, Nature magazine or whoever for making big jumps, then, making strong progress, then that's all they're going to optimize for. So whereas like if like Nature was like every time someone submits a paper that could have with a technology that has potential dual use, as in like it could be for good, but also could be very dangerous, they actually don't publish it, for example, or publish it with like a big asterisk saying this could potentially be bad. Now, all of a sudden, you're changing the incentive structures. And that's what we need to do. And I think government is not necessarily going to be the best way to do that. Whereas like the individual scientific journals couldn't change those. They wield a lot of power because ultimately, scientists, obviously they're like most of them are actually looking, they're trying to solve big mysteries and help people, but they are also incentivized to win prizes, Nobel Prizes, that sort of thing. And this would be a way of changing the incentive structures.
Interesting. So Lenin had this quote that the capitalists will sell us the rope to hang them. And it's in some ways it's similar, where like we're doing these things to really promote this AI. How do we get how do we change the incentive, or how do we work with these publications? Or obviously these are smart people that run the publications, but to encourage these labels or encourage different type of review?
I don't know I can answer that, because I haven't thought about it deeply enough, honestly.
Okay.
I don't have an answer to that. I think it's anyone who's good at thinking about incentive structures and understands sort of like essentially the capitalistic model of science should be putting their mind to this. I don't think governments are the way to go on this. I think governments they don't understand the problem enough. They would probably likely do more harm than good, because it's like Western governments would shut down like the good Western companies, for example, which would really, because this is a worldwide phenomenon. It's not just like America, and that would now leave, I would much rather the people I know who are working at Western AI companies are brilliant, good people thinking about safety very, very well. So we want more of them. We want them to be actually free to do their work. And it's more the TikToks of the world and so on, that I think we should, if anything needs government or regulation, it's those guys more. So I can't answer that question of like how to, like what we should be saying to the scientific journals or how to approach that topic, but I think it's something worth thinking about. Okay.
I had a couple questions about like probabilities and stuff. People are generally not very good at understanding probabilities. And those who think probabilistically seem to be well rewarded. And how can people better apply a probabilistic lens just to their everyday life?
Well, the way I sort of trained myself to do it, because obviously I play poker, and poker is very much, not only do you've got the sort of simple probability calculations of like, well, I know that there are 3 aces left in the deck, so the likelihood that I'm going to hit the ace that I need is X or whatever. But it also trains you to think probabilistically about sort of these more fuzzy uncertainties. Like, oh, well, I noticed that, when I made this bet that he took this big inhale, which seemed very naturally reactive as opposed to like faked. But what probability do I give it that he's actually faking it versus this? And because the trouble is that we usually go about our lives thinking, oh, he's probably bluffing me. Most of the time, this is going to happen. We use words to describe our uncertainty as opposed to actual quantified numbers. And so just building the habit of trying to estimate likelihoods around things we never normally would.
So literally just trying to put a number, like what is the probability this person is bluffing right now, or the probability that this agent who says that they can't do this for me actually can't do it for me, or something like that. Just random things that happen in your everyday life.
Yeah. And I mean, the sort of counter argument to that people have made is, well, yeah, but now you're applying like false granularity. If you say, oh, well, 33% of the time my agent is going to come back and say this, you're implying that you have really good epistemics around this. But I just don't think that's the case, because
then you could just update them or something like that.
Or you can sort of think about it in a range, be like, okay, well, I know it's less than half the time, so it's certainly under 50%, but it's more than 1 in 10, so it's greater than 10%, and you can like sort of iterate until you sort of converge on what feels like a reasonable percentage. And just like build the habit of making like 3 formal predictions about things per day, for example. And by a formal prediction, I mean like this will happen by this time with this this frequency, this percentage, this will happen, I'm 20% confident that this is going to happen, and I'm 85% confident this is going to happen.
What would be an example of something random that we could do that with?
So
like I like one of the things I do in the morning is
go on.
Well, like I like make eggs for my kids in the morning, and I would say like a very high percentage of the time, but not 50% of the time, some of the eggshell ends up in the bowl. And, I just like, I'm not great at cracking the egg yet. Like I could make a prediction about that and say, it's a 33% chance that my eggshell is going to end up in the bowl.
Yeah, that's a great example. I love that.
Okay.
Especially because you could do it with the kids and get them,
into it. Yeah,
exactly. They'll get into it. It's like, oh, Dad, we found some today. Oh, well, let's write it down. And you can start like recording data, and eventually you'll get like an N of 30, and it starts to become statistically meaningful.
Yeah.
No, I love that. That's a great example. An example I always like to give, particularly not just of thinking probabilistically, but of thinking in terms of expected value, which is even more useful, is like, you are running late for an important meeting, you can't find a parking space, and you have to decide whether or not just to park illegally or not. So then it's a question of like, okay, well, what's my expected loss of actually being late or missing the meeting? Let's say it's going to cost you $1,000 on expectation in terms of like missed opportunity. Okay, well, what's my expected loss of parking illegally? Let's say you think you're going to get caught 20% of the time, and if you do, you're going to get a ticket that's $100. So actually your expected loss there is $20 on average. So actually it makes sense to take the gamble and park illegally. Obviously I'm not advocating for that, but that's a classic example of using expected value thinking. It's such a simple formula, but it's so powerful, and it drives me nuts that this is not taught. This should be taught in kindergarten, or not kindergarten, but certainly in like K-12. And it's not. And I studied physics. I never learned it. It wasn't until I just became a professional poker player that I learned about expected value as a concept, which is just mind blowing. Maybe they teach it in business school. Do they teach it in like business school? Or
I didn't go to business school, but certainly I did a lot of probability in college. So, but that was my weird. So
you
nature.
did learn it there.
Yes. When I was in college, we did a ton of like operations research and things like that. I guess today they might call it data science, where we learned those types of things.
Okay, well, that's good to know. It is taught somewhere, but I don't know. It should just be part of the math curriculum for like 14-year-olds, because it's so simple.
Certainly agree. Yeah, it's probably a lot more. I certainly use all this stuff all the time, whereas I don't use any of my calculus.
Yeah,
and probably spend spend a lot more time learning calculus, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Trigonometry. I just haven't used it once since, and I did. I do mathy things.
What is a one piece of advice that I give young people is to not optimize for optionality. Young people often pick careers that give them the greatest amount of flexibility and optionality to reduce risks. And in some ways that's, at least my opinion is it could be a recipe for like a mediocre career or career that you're less satisfied with. But that could be like counterintuitive when thinking probabilistically about outcomes versus like risk versus reward. How do you think about my advice? You think it's decent, or you think it's flawed? Or
my gut reaction to that is, oh, that's wrong, but I'm not sure why. I think, I don't know. I guess it's just from like my personal life journey. I felt like having maximum optionality was beneficial to me because, I'm very happy with how things turned out. And, I like that I had maximum options of which subject I chose at university. But I don't know, maybe that's just like some survivor bias talking, of course I'm going to think that having maximum option value was good for me because I happen to be.
But did you choose what you did because you were trying to maximize for optionality? No. Typically the typical thing is somebody chooses to go to law school, not because they want to go to be a lawyer, because they love the law, but they choose to go to law school because, well, it's good optionality. I know I can get some job if I need it, and it sets me up to do other things. Or so it's kind of a typical. That would be like a typical choice, or it's kind of the reason people choose to go to McKinsey. Well, I don't know if I really want to be a consultant, but I'm like, I'll learn something and be kind of interesting, and it looks good on my resume.
I mean, I think it just depends on the person. Like, if you know already what you want to do, like if you're, again, going back to the beginning, like if you're like an Elon Musk type, visionary, then perhaps if you already know what you want to do, then why waste time going and doing a sort of more general thing that like gives you maximum option value? Might not make sense. But if you don't know what you want to do, then I think doing, one of the reasons I chose to study physics, I mean, I loved it, but I wasn't dead certain that I was going to become an astrophysicist. I just knew that, okay, I could have done engineering. Like, I like that too. But in the end, I chose physics because I felt like it was more broadly applicable. And yeah, I don't know. It is definitely a trade-off, because certainly, like right now, I actually don't like how much optionality I have, because I'm like, I want to get back into, now I've got my new house, I'm getting my little studio set up. I want to get back into content creation. And honestly, I just have deep option anxiety, because I'm like, do I make a series on this, or do I focus on this, or maybe I start a podcast, or maybe I do this. And I honestly, I want like someone smarter than me, who knows me very well and who knows what's good for the world, to like just go, no, focus on this, and basically be my boss and tell me what to do. It can be a blessing or a curse. But in terms of like choosing, and like the career advice I give to people, and this sort of also applies to like, if you're age 18 and choosing what to study at university, is don't necessarily think about what your particular passion is. Think about what will help the world. Because if you focus on doing something that will help the world, you are going to get rewarded for that much more often. And people are going to want to help you. And that's going to build you a stronger network, stronger social capital, and more money, basically, in fairly early on. Because you've got people working to help build you up and help you achieve what you've set out to do. And that will, reap dividends, it's like compound interest over the later years in your life, when you then have the flexibility, if you want, to go back and pursue that passion, the original thing that you thought was your passion. A friend of mine gave a really good TED talk on this. Basically, he gives career advice for people who are interested in effective altruism, which is effectively like, how do you make the biggest positive impact on the world with your life? And his advice is just focus on something that that the world really needs. Start on that, and then you'll find time to do your other passions as well. If they truly are your passions, you'll make it happen. But chances are the thing that the world needs will turn into your passion, because it's going to be so rewarding.
One other thing on the optionality on the personal side, it does seem like a lot of people, like the ultimate elimination of optionality is getting married, right? And a lot of the smarter the person, often the more they delay the getting married side. Yeah. So that's another way of showing how like super smart people are kind of like very, maybe someone could say undervaluing, someone could say overvaluing optionality. And I don't know, that's necessarily at the right median point.
Yeah, I mean, the marriage thing is certainly, I remember having it from a young age. I had a strict rule with myself. I will not get married before the age of 30.
Really? That was just in your head somehow.
It was just always in my head. And I don't know why. How
did that come about? It was like, you read it in a book or something, or like,
I mean, I didn't have much respect for marriage, because like my parents divorced when I was 10. There was a lot of divorce in my family. And what was interesting is that the divorces all worked out really well. My parents divorced, and then they ended up getting married to just the best possible step parents. Like, I'm as close to both my step parents as I am to my birth parents. So it was so much better for me. Like, instead of being in like having two miserable parents,
essentially the date. I mean, it's an N of one data point, but the data point is they got married too early. And if they had just waited a little bit, they would have found a much better compatible person or something like that.
Yes. And I mean, for a while, it made me think that, oh, we're just not designed to, there is no such thing as a soulmate. There is no such thing as, one person for one person for everybody. And I mean, I don't know, I'm still on the fence with that. I think it just varies. Some personality types need more variety. Some people do really well with monogamy. I actually always assumed I was someone who just needed to have, I'm going to have like lots of relationships throughout my life because I get bored quickly and that sort of thing. But then actually I met my partner, Igor, who, now 8 years ago, and we've been together now so happily. And I can't imagine going, like life without him. It's just so great. And it's, I don't know. So that made me think that soulmates are a thing. You know what I mean? Okay, but that brought me back to it. It's
okay,
I was so adamant,
one,
I will not settle down. And now I'm like so happily settled down, and like it's just so it's just like swings and roundabouts. But that said, I know it's interesting that the not getting married until 30 was in my head. I don't know where. I think I was like 15 or so, and I just said, no, I'm not doing this. I can't say I thought about it that deeply. It was just like, I think I was probably just saying it to sound cool, honestly, to my friends. But the point is, I had that, and it happened to be the case.
Interesting. All right. Well, a couple more personal questions before we close. I know a few years ago you learned how to fly a plane, which from my standpoint, as someone who thinking probabilistically, I don't know, it seems there's some definitely inherent risk in that particular endeavor. Like, how did you think about that from like a risk perspective?
Well, I can't say I thought that. I mean, I wasn't like I was taking flying lessons in a little Cessna or whatever, which does have reasonable enough risk that it's warranted to calculate. Like, I think you're referring to a video I posted. That was in a friend's plane who he's a pilot, and he's like, would you like to have, can I teach you? Like, let's go have a lesson. So I felt incredibly safe there because it was, it wasn't just like a little Cessna. B, he knows what the hell he's doing, and it's not like I'm just in control and making any kind of significant risk. But that said, I guess like if something has more than, so like what is, I think, I'm trying to remember what the number is, but I think we all have like someone of my age has a 1 in 1,000th chance of dying each year.
It's probably right for someone your age. Yep.
It's like
my age is probably 1%. Yeah.
Probably not that much, but like I don't know, it's probably like one in 300, something like that. So you just need to look at what your baseline rate of dying is for your demographic and age and health and so on. And then if an activity you're going to do is significantly above that, well, now it's probably worth reconsidering. So now it's a question of like, what's the payoff? Like, how much pleasure are you going to get out of it? Are you going to get 3 years worth of pleasure? Then sure, go for it. And so on. So I think that's the sort of main starting point, but then beyond that, it becomes pretty subjective. But yeah, people don't even, that's the thing. The main mistake people make with their risk calculations is they don't ever look at the baseline.
Right.
It's I guess like, this is really dangerous. It's like dangerous compared to what? Like dangerous.
So when I'm 100, I'm just gonna I'm gonna be like doing some crazy shit when I'm 100 years old.
Absolutely. Like, my God. Yeah. Like you should be going up in risk. Absolutely.
Interesting.
And people don't.
Yeah. Most people do the opposite. They go down in risk over time.
Yeah. And I would like to think I would become, let's say if I think the risk from various existential risks, whether it's nuclear war or whatever, are like mounting significantly, then that should change my calculus of things that I've been fearful of doing. Like I've interestingly never done a parachute jump, and I'm weirdly scared of it, which doesn't make sense for my personality type because I love things about I love roller coasters and so on. But for some reason, I've always had a bug in my head about doing a parachute jump. But if, for example, my concerns about AI or synthetic biology or whatever have gone up, which they have, I should probably be more embracing of these risks, which are perhaps would have been above my comfort level before.
Well, I can tell you as someone who doesn't like roller coasters and who has done a parachute jump, it was the scariest thing I'd ever done. And I will never do anything like that again in my life.
Interesting. Well, were you scared up until that moment that the parachute successfully deployed? Or I
was scared all the way through until my legs hit the ground, but I'm a little bit of a scaredy cat in general. So
good for you for doing it though. Nice.
All right. Last question we ask all of our guests. What is the conventional wisdom or advice that you think is generally bad advice?
I guess my personal bugbear is when people are like, they over rely on intuition, gut instinct, whatever you want to call it. And they treat it as this like one size fits all perfect answer to difficult problems. I went into this in my TED talk. I hopped on about it so much. If you Google intuition, the kind of responses you get are these like inspirational memes, usually on Instagram, where it's like, always trust your gut feelings. It's never wrong. 100%. If in doubt, go with your gut. And it's just terrible advice, because having played poker for a decade, even after, even when I was a very experienced player, I would have like, sometimes someone make a big bet and my gut would say, oh my God, they've got the stronger hand than you. Basically, I'd have a very strong intuitive feeling, so strong that I would ignore what the math says, because usually you're getting a certain number of odds, and that with certain hands you can just mathematically call, and you're not making, that's the correct play. But I've overridden that because I had such a strong gut feeling to the contrary, and then my gut feeling turned out to be wrong. That's happened to me like I can think of like 3 occasions where it happened for when I had a lot of money on the line. And I was just like, oh, it's so strong. I have to go with it. Like, it has so much more experience. Something happening that I don't know about. And it was just dead wrong. And I felt like a fucking idiot. So that's just true for all of us. And the trouble is that, like, obviously intuition can be an incredibly powerful tool. The trouble is that we need to know what kind of scenarios to use it for. And this one size fit all ethos that people have with it is just wrong. So basically, it seems like with all things, the more experience we have, the better our intuitions are at that. Experience we have in a certain type of decision, the better our intuitions will be around it. Makes sense, because like, if we think that intuition is just a result of like unconscious processing going on in our brains, then basically it still means it requires data. And so
the heuristic that I've used that, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on. So, and it's in a different way, but let's say as an investor, let's say in the end, you're deciding to invest or not invest in this particular project or something. What I have done is, if my intuition says to invest, then I use data, but I don't use it to actually make the decision. But if it says to not invest, and because there could be like some scam or some other type of thing that I might not be able to figure out with data, then I'll usually go with the gut to not invest. Mm-hmm. That doesn't always work. So sometimes the things that my intuition says don't invest in were good investments, and I should have invested in it. But at least historically, it seems to work better than not.
Right. So you use it as like a primary filter to then decide whether or not you go and do like further investigation
on the to invest. But if my intuition says don't invest in this deal, I don't invest. I don't invest no matter what in that deal. Again, that's not always. Sometimes I should have invested.
Right, you're going to have an error rate. The question is like how. Yeah, it's a trade-off between how much, because if you had infinite time, you would presumably just like look at the data on everything, but you can't. Correct. So you have to like how do you find a sort of healthy balance there? No, I think that makes a lot of sense. But again, you've been investing for many years, right? You've seen tons of companies that you said yes to, you said no to. So you've got a lot of experience in this. This would have been a bad thing to do 20 years ago when you were first starting out, because your intuitions just hadn't had chance to gather any data yet. And so they are not going to be that useful. And that's the mistake people make, is that they think that, because often a lot of the really tough decisions we make in life are these like really rare things, like, should I get married to my current partner, or should I buy this house as opposed to this one? And the typical advice people say, give to each other in that is like, oh, I don't know, that's a tough one, just go with your gut. And it's like, no, because
even in that case, even in that case, my gut said don't do something, I wouldn't do it. If the gut, like if you're, I don't know, someone asks you on a date or something and your intuition says, I don't think I should go out with this person. or I don't think I should buy this house or something like that, then I would just say, don't just trust your gut to not do something, but don't trust your gut to do something.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, with the like the going on a date thing, the thing is that actually that's something we have, even if you don't go on many dates, you have what you're still doing is basically you're doing a personality assessment on people.
Yeah, that's right.
And we do that all the time. We've been doing that since, we could talk, right?
Yeah.
So our intuitions are typically very good at reading people. It's one of the things they're better suited for, again, because we have a lot of, even probably history and knowledge we've inherited from our parents. I think there's probably some kind of information that we gain just sort of through our lineage about like social dynamics. So that's an example of where intuition is, that doesn't go against my rule of thumb, but it's interesting that you basically use it as a like a loss aversion tool as opposed to a gain maximization tool.
It's
I've not heard
the tiger might be in the jungle type of thing, right? So yeah.
The trouble with that is that thinking back to like poker, is that we typically, most humans have a greater loss aversion than they do, like it hurts us more to lose something we already have than it makes us happy to gain it when we didn't have it before. So it means that we have an innate bias towards loss aversion. Even our intuitions do. So that means we probably if you always listen to your intuition on every time it says, oh, don't do that, you're probably over missing out on stuff because of that inbuilt baked in loss aversion that we all have.
How much do you think poker actually helps? Because in some ways poker is like a weird game where it's a game, there's rules, you're kind of like, you've got a certain number of chips that you're playing and stuff like that. And, it's like my main advantage in playing poker is just I've chose not to play the poker game. Right. And because there's infinite number of games you can play, and you want to play games that you have some, or maybe not infinite, but there's a lot of games you can play. You want to play games you have some sort of advantage in, and part of poker, one of the things poker is just like staying power. You just have to like be around for 6 hours and fresh,
right?
And it's like it's a tiring game where often ends at 4 a.m. or something, right? So like, how much do you think we can really learn from poker?
I think it's one of the best games out there to teach people how to be better decision makers in life.
Just because because classically people are always resulting and stuff.
Yes, people are always resulting. It taxes you in many different ways in terms of it makes you mentally model people. So there's a lot of psychology. It makes you work with literal, odds and statistics. So there's a lot of like quantified statistical reasoning. There's like layers of strategy. There's like dealing with like high stress environments, like how to decision make when you've got like actual, something that you really care about on the line. So it's just such a great like training ground for the kinds of decision making you make in any form of life, but especially in business. But what's nice about it is that it's got much tighter feedback loops than almost anything else we do. We typically get to find out whether we were right or wrong. Now, not always, because obviously there's some stuff where like, you go on a long losing streak and like maybe you got unlucky, maybe you're playing bad, like it's that. But even then you can usually find out, because nowadays there are even like solvers that will show you what the correct mathematical solution is to things. So you can literally go and compare like, well, I did this. Oh, well, actually I should be doing this with this frequency. And so I don't know, it's like the best analog to the messiness of like real life decision making I've seen within a game, and it's got these nice tight feedback loops. So I wouldn't recommend to anyone to go out and try and be a professional anymore. I think that career is by and large done, honestly, just because of AI. Like we now have like super intelligent AIs that people can, certainly online poker. There was like a big cheating scandal that literally just came out this week I was reading about, because turns out,
makes sense.
Yeah, people are using these real-time game theory optimal like solvers, basically. They used to, it would usually take like 6 hours to run one of these to get the solutions. So you could never actually use it while you're playing online. It's more about just going away and studying and then go to play. But apparently they've now got them down to like under 1 minute in just a few years. So like, it just means that the trust is gone. You can't go and play high stakes online poker anymore and assume that you're playing a fair game.
Yep.
So it doesn't make sense to go out and try and learn poker as a means of making money, as a way of making a living. But I think it makes a lot of sense to go out and learn it as a means of learning how to understand your own mind and other people's minds, and how to make high stakes decisions under a lot of pressure in very complex environment.
All right, this is great. Liv Boeree, thank you for being on the World of DaaS with us. I follow you on Twitter. Where is that the best place for people to find you on the interwebs?
Yeah, Twitter is where I just like tweet insane things. But it's probably, that's my most high, my high frequency posting.
Yeah.
But what I really want everyone to follow me on, go and subscribe to my YouTube, because I am in my cool little new studio. I'm going to be ramping up the plan is to make more video content, which is like my real passion. So please go subscribe to me there.
Okay, great. And for those who are listening, it's Boeree is your last name. So please make sure you go do that. Thank you, Liv. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been great.
This is awesome. Thank you so much.